The afternoon sun blazed against the city streets, turning the pavement into a mirror of heat and dust. In the middle of that chaos, a sudden metallic clatter cut through the noise, sharp, urgent, impossible to ignore. I turned my head, and time seemed to slow. Dozens of coins spun wildly across the ground, rolling between feet, bouncing off curbs, glinting like fallen stars in the daylight. At the center of it all, a frail woman knelt on shaking knees, her trembling hands scrambling to gather them before strangers' shoes crushed them. People glanced, frowned, and walked past, without care. To them, she was invisible, but to me, she was impossible to ignore. I froze, caught between the rush of the crowd and the strange pull of her desperation. Her clothes were faded, patched in places where the fabric had given up years ago. Dust clung to her hair in tangled strands, her sandals barely holding together. She looked every bit the part of a beggar, yet there was something in her stillness that didn't belong to the streets. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't crying out for help like most in her condition would have. No. Her silence carried something else, a strange gravity that drew me closer even as everyone else hurried past. It wasn't poverty I saw in her eyes. It was pride, wounded, but unbroken. I crouched down beside her, ignoring the disapproving glances of strangers rushing around us. "Let me help you," I murmured, reaching for the nearest coin before it rolled under a rickshaw's tire. She stiffened, almost as if she didn't want my help, but her hands trembled too much to protest. The coins felt strangely heavy in my palm, small discs of copper and silver, but laden with meaning I couldn't explain. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, as though unused for days. She avoided my gaze, keeping her eyes fixed on the pavement. As I gathered coin after coin, I noticed her hands. They weren't the rough, blistered hands of a beggar who lived on scraps. They were long, slender, with delicate fingers. Though worn down by time, they held a grace that seemed out of place against the dust-stained ground. Why would a woman like her be here, on her knees, chasing scattered coins? When I placed the final coin into her palm, she closed her fingers around it as if it were life itself. For the first time, she looked directly at me. Her eyes, deep, sharp, and unsettlingly steady, met mine. And for that brief second, I felt as if she saw through me completely, peeling away every layer of curiosity, doubt, and hesitation. "Not pity," she murmured suddenly, as though reading my thoughts. "I need no pity." I blinked, caught off guard. "It's not pity," I replied quietly. "It's just kindness." Her lips trembled into the faintest curve, something between a smile and a wince. She tucked the coins back into her cloth pouch with careful precision, as though each piece held a secret weight. Then, under her breath, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, she whispered a name. It was a name that meant nothing to me at that moment, just syllables in the air. But there was a peculiar way she spoke it, as though it carried centuries of history and unspoken power. I wanted to ask her what it meant, but before I could, she pulled her scarf tighter around her face and rose to her feet with a quiet dignity that silenced my words. She nodded once, almost regal in her poise, and turned away. The crowd swallowed her. I stood frozen, the heat of the pavement searing through my shoes, the sound of clattering coins still echoing in my ears. Something inside me told me this was no ordinary beggar, no ordinary accident. It was the beginning of something larger, something that would pull me into a story I wasn't ready to believe. I slipped one coin into my pocket before realizing what I had done. It wasn't theft. It was instinct, a keepsake of the strange encounter, cold and metallic against my palm. That night, lying awake, I turned the coin over and over under the lamplight. It wasn't an ordinary coin. Its edges were smoother, its engraving sharper, and on its surface, faint but clear, was a crest I had never seen before. A crest that looked like it belonged not to the streets, but to something powerful, untouchable. The next day, as I passed the city's tallest building, a massive tower of glass and steel, I froze. The name engraved in gold above its entrance was the same one she had whispered on the street. My blood turned cold. The beggar I had helped owned the very bank that ruled this city. And in that instant, I realized I hadn't just picked up scattered coins. I had picked up the first thread of a destiny far greater than I could imagine. That night, her whispered name haunted me like an echo I couldn't silence. I couldn't sleep, the coin burning against my palm as though it held secrets too heavy to carry. By morning, I gave in. I typed those strange syllables into the search bar, and when the results appeared, my world tilted upside down. The glow of my old laptop screen lit up the tiny apartment as the search results loaded slowly, each second stretching like an eternity. I leaned closer, my heart thudding, half expecting nothing, half dreading everything. And then, I saw it. The same name she had whispered, glowing in bold headlines across news articles and financial journals. Eleanor Grace Whitmore. Not a beggar, not forgotten, not invisible, but the elusive banking magnate, heiress of Whitmore Holdings, the woman whose fortune stretched across continents, whose decisions could make or break empires. The name engraved in gold above the tallest bank in the city wasn't just a coincidence. It was hers. I blinked hard, reloading the page as though the internet might be playing tricks on me. But no. There she was, her photograph staring back at me from dozens of articles. A younger Eleanor, dressed in sleek business attire, commanding boardrooms with a calm authority. Awards, interviews, public appearances, all chronicled until about 3 years ago. And then, nothing. A sudden vanishing act, her public image replaced by speculation. One headline caught my breath: Bank heiress withdraws from spotlight following mysterious scandal. Another: From power to silence, Eleanor Whitmore's disappearance baffles industry. And yet, the woman I had seen on the street bore little resemblance to these polished photos. That Eleanor had been radiant, poised, untouchable. The woman with trembling hands and scattered coins was human, fragile, broken. How? I scrolled faster, scanning article after article. Rumors flew like arrows. Betrayal by business partners, the collapse of a secret engagement, whispers of lawsuits and enemies. But none of it explained why a woman of such immense wealth and status would be kneeling on a dusty street, clutching at coins as if her survival depended on them. My stomach twisted with guilt. I had assumed she was a beggar. Had I insulted her dignity? Did she know I'd recognized her name? Would she think I was prying into her life now? I shut the laptop and pressed my palms against my temples. What if she didn't want to be found? What if she had whispered her name by accident, or worse, as a warning? Yet deep inside, another voice whispered louder. What if she wanted me to know? The thought terrified me. Because if that was true, then I had been pulled into something much bigger than chance. I barely noticed the day pass. At every sound outside my window, I jumped, expecting to see her face in the crowd. The coin lay heavy on the table, its engraved crest catching stray streaks of sunlight. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, it anchored me to her. That evening, I brewed coffee and sat staring at the coin. Should I reach out? The question gnawed at me. If I did nothing, I risked losing the only link I had to her. If I intruded, I risked stepping into a life where I didn't belong. As the hours crept toward midnight, I picked up my phone, scrolling through contacts, trying to distract myself. And then, my screen lit up. A new message from an unknown number. Meet me tomorrow. Same street. Noon. My throat went dry. No name, no details, just that one line. But somehow I knew. It was her. I stared at the message for minutes that felt like hours. My mind raced with questions. How did she find me? Why did she want to see me again? And most of all, what was I walking into? Sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned, hearing the clatter of coins in my dreams, seeing her eyes, pride and pain locked together. By dawn, exhaustion gave way to resolve. I couldn't ignore the summons. Whatever awaited me, I had already stepped too far to turn back. When the sun finally rose, its light washed over the city's glass towers like liquid gold. I tucked the coin into my pocket, its cold weight pressing against my thigh, and stepped outside. The streets bustled with life, but everything felt sharper, as though the world knew I was heading into something extraordinary. At noon, I stood exactly where I had first seen her, the place where coins had scattered like stars. The noise of the city buzzed around me, vendors shouting, rickshaws rattling, children laughing in the distance. But inside, my chest was a storm. And then I felt it, that familiar presence, the way the air seemed to shift. I turned. She was there. Not in tattered rags this time, but in a simple dress, modest yet refined. Still understated, still weary. But there was a quiet strength in her stance, a strength I hadn't noticed before. She looked at me, and for the first time, I thought I saw the faintest trace of trust in her eyes. Without a word, she stepped closer and placed something in my hand. A folded envelope, sealed with a wax crest, the same design etched on the coin. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Now you know who I am. Tomorrow you'll learn why I'm here." Before I could reply, she turned and melted into the crowd, leaving me with the envelope and a heart pounding against my ribs. I held the envelope tightly, its seal unbroken, my palms damp with sweat. Inside it lay answers, or dangers I wasn't sure I wanted. The woman the world called a ghost had chosen me as her witness, and as the city roared around me, I knew tomorrow would change everything I thought I knew about her, and about myself. Midnight has a different weight when you're walking toward a stranger's secret. The streets were silent, lamps flickering, as I stood before iron gates taller than any door I'd ever dared to approach. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier than stone, its wax seal still unbroken, daring me to step inside. And in that silence, I knew I was about to walk into a world that had never been meant for me. I had spent the entire day staring at the envelope, my thumb grazing the seal until it was warm beneath my skin. Curiosity gnawed at me, but fear held my hand still. Opening it felt like tearing into something sacred, like crossing a line from which there would be no return. By dusk I couldn't take it anymore. I broke the seal with shaking hands and slid out the folded letter. The handwriting was sharp, elegant, and deliberate. Elmhurst Estate, midnight, no companions. Ask for Eleanor. That was it. No explanations, no assurances, just an address that carried weight I could feel in my bones. The hours crawled. I paced the apartment, unable to sit, unable to think of anything else. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked like a man possessed, eyes wide, shirt clinging with sweat, lips muttering silent questions to no one. Why me? Why now? Why was Eleanor Whitmore, once the untouchable face of the banking world, reaching into my life like this? By the time the clock struck 11:30, I knew there was no backing out. The coin and the letter were too much to ignore. I buttoned my cleanest shirt, shoved the coin into my pocket, and stepped into the night. The taxi ride felt endless. As the city lights faded behind me, the streets grew darker, quieter, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. When the car finally pulled to a stop, I looked out the window and froze. Elmhurst Estate wasn't just a house. It was a fortress dressed as a dream. Wrought iron gates stretched before me, flanked by stone pillars carved with ivy and lions. Beyond, I caught glimpses of lantern-lit gardens, fountains that shimmered like liquid glass, and shadows of towers rising against the moonlit sky. My chest tightened. I had never been anywhere like this, and every instinct screamed that I didn't belong. The driver cleared his throat. "You sure this is the place?" I swallowed hard, nodding. My voice refused to answer. With stiff legs, I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes sounding deafening in the night air. The taxi's engine hummed away, leaving me alone with the gates. For a moment, I simply stood there, paralyzed. Then, with trembling fingers, I reached for the intercom and whispered her name. The silence that followed stretched unbearably long until at last the gates creaked open on silent hinges. The sound chilled me to my core. It wasn't the welcoming creak of a door, but the sound of a mouth opening to swallow. Inside, the path wound through manicured lawns and roses heavy with dew. My shoes clicked softly on the stones, each step pulling me deeper into another world. Lanterns cast pools of golden light, illuminating statues that seemed to watch me pass. By the time I reached the steps of the estate, I was drenched in a mix of awe and dread. The doors swung open before I touched them. A butler in a black coat and white gloves bowed stiffly. "Mr. Mercer," he said in a low voice, though I never told him my name. "This way, please." My throat tightened. How much did she already know about me? The butler led me into a grand foyer, its marble floors reflecting light from chandeliers that seemed to hold constellations. Portraits lined the walls, men and women with sharp eyes, each one painted to last through centuries. Their gazes followed me, accusing and curious at once. "Wait here," the butler said, then disappeared down a hall, his footsteps fading into the silence. I stood frozen, overwhelmed. My fingers brushed the coin in my pocket, grounding myself in its cold solidity. That's when I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. From the shadows of the stairway, she emerged. Eleanor. No rags this time, no trembling hands. She wore a simple gown of midnight silk, her hair tied back, her posture regal yet tired. She didn't look like the woman I had seen on the street, nor the polished executive from old photographs. She was something in between, someone remade by fire and ashes, holding both ruin and resilience in her eyes. "You came," she said softly, almost to herself. I could only nod, words lodged in my throat. She gestured toward a side door. "Come, there's something you need to see." I followed her into a smaller room, a private study lit only by a fire in the hearth. The air smelled of oak and old books. In the center of the room lay a jacket draped over the back of a chair. Its fabric was fine, bespoke, yet the tear down its sleeve caught my eye immediately. Eleanor picked it up, running her fingers along the rip. "Strange, isn't it?" she murmured. "That something so finely made can unravel so easily, just like lives." Her eyes flicked up to mine. "You helped me pick up coins when I had nothing. Now I ask if you can help me mend something greater." My voice finally broke free. "Why me? Why not someone who belongs here, in this world?" She smiled faintly, a smile more weary than warm. "Because they see only money. You saw me." The fire cracked, shadows dancing along the walls. She placed the jacket in my hands, her gaze piercing mine. "Tell me, are you ready to hold threads that can change everything?" The jacket felt heavier than fabric, its torn sleeve a question I wasn't ready to answer. Her eyes bore into me, searching for something I wasn't sure I had. At that moment, I realized this wasn't about mending cloth. It was about mending her broken world. And as the fire roared behind her, I wondered, was I ready to pay the price of saying yes? Every disguise tells a story, but hers was stitched with sorrow. Why would a woman of wealth choose rags over diamonds? Her answer chilled me, like winter rain. Because money can't buy truth. And at that moment, I realized the real mask wasn't on her face. It was on the world's. We sat across from each other in the dim light of the fire-lit study. The jacket with its torn sleeve lay untouched on the table between us. But my attention was no longer on fabric or stitches. It was on her eyes, the same eyes I had once mistaken for desperation, now alive with an intensity that pinned me in place. She lifted her hands slowly, as though peeling away invisible layers, and said, "Do you know why I wear rags? Why I let the world believe I am no one?" I swallowed hard, unsure whether to answer. My silence must have been permission enough, because she leaned back in her chair and began to speak. "When you are born into wealth, you learn very quickly what money buys. It buys obedience, admiration, fear. It even buys love, at least the kind of love that wilts as soon as the vault doors close. But truth, genuine kindness, a hand offered without expectation." She shook her head, her lips tightening. "Money cannot buy that. And when you are drowning in gold, you realize just how rare those things really are." Her words sank into me like stones in water. I thought back to the day I bent down to help her gather coins. How many others had stepped over her without a second glance? How many had chosen not to see? And how many times in my own life had I done the same? Eyes forward, heart closed, because someone looked too broken to matter. I lowered my gaze, ashamed. Eleanor seemed to notice, because her tone softened. "I've walked through gilded halls, attended galas where every smile was calculated, every compliment a transaction. But I felt more invisible there than I ever have on the streets dressed as a beggar. At least here," she gestured toward the imagined rags. "People show me who they are. The cruel ones shove me aside. The indifferent ones ignore me. But the rare few," her eyes flicked to mine, "they stop. They see." A strange heat rose in my chest. I wanted to look away, but her gaze held me captive. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "I think I do," I murmured, though the truth was heavier. I didn't just understand her experiment, I felt implicated by it. Because in the quiet of my mind, memories of every coin I had stepped over without care flooded me. Moments when I had chosen comfort over compassion. And the thought stung. Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. I needed to know if humanity still existed outside vaults and contracts. And then, you appeared. The words hung in the air like a confession. I couldn't tell if she meant them as gratitude or warning. She stood, moving slowly toward the tall window that overlooked the moonlit gardens. Her silhouette, framed by silver light, looked more like a queen than a beggar. The disguise became my only escape. Boardrooms were betrayal after betrayal. Partners who saw me as a purse, not a person. Friends who vanished when scandal touched my name. And the deeper I sank into silence, the more I craved to know. Was I still worth something, even if I had nothing? She turned suddenly, her eyes gleaming like tempered steel. So I became no one. I put on rags, dirtied my hands, and walked among the forgotten. And in their eyes I found more honesty than I ever did in polished shoes or diamond necklaces. Her words cut through me. I wanted to protest, to tell her she was still someone even without her fortune. But I realized she wasn't asking for validation. She was testing me, watching how I processed her truth. I licked my dry lips. But doesn't it hurt to let the world believe you've fallen so far? Eleanor let out a quiet laugh, bitter, hollow. It hurts less than knowing they only stood near me because I stood above them. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the crackling fire. She walked closer, her footsteps deliberate, her presence overwhelming. When she stopped before me, I could see the faintest glimmer of unshed tears in her eyes. "You think poverty is weakness," she said, almost accusingly. "But poverty strips away the lies. It shows you who you are when you have nothing left to barter with. That's why I chose this mask. Because only in losing everything could I see who I was." Her voice trembled at the last word, and my heart clenched. This was not the Eleanor of news headlines, the untouchable heiress. This was a woman broken open by betrayal, daring me to see her scars. I wanted to say something comforting, but the weight of her honesty silenced me. All I could manage was a whispered, "I see you now." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but it vanished almost instantly. She leaned down, close enough that I felt her breath against my skin, her voice dropping into a near whisper. "Do you want to see what hides behind the vault?" Her question lingered like a blade between us, sharp and dangerous. The fire's glow flickered across her face, half shadow, half light, as though she herself stood between two worlds. I felt the coin in my pocket grow colder, as if it already knew the answer I hadn't spoken. And with her eyes locked on mine, I realized, stepping through that vault might mean losing myself forever. The bank's marble doors groaned open, echoing like thunder across the deserted hall, and I stepped into a world I had never belonged to. Rows of gold bars gleamed in the half-light, stacked like silent judges, each one heavier than a life itself. She walked ahead of me, her steps unhurried, her spine straight, no longer a beggar, but a queen in exile. And as I followed her shadow across the polished floor, one question burned in my mind. Why invite me here? Narrative. The vault was nothing like I imagined. I had seen photographs in news articles, images of men in suits proudly unveiling riches, television anchors marveling at neatly stacked wealth, but standing there in person was something entirely different. The air was colder, heavier, as though every ingot of gold, every case of jewels had absorbed centuries of human greed. Eleanor's voice echoed softly against the marble pillars as she moved. "Welcome to the heart of Whitmore Holdings. To the world, this is the fortress of power. To me, it is a prison built on coins that never belonged to us." Her words chilled me more than the temperature. I looked around, the walls lined with safety deposit boxes, the massive vault door like a beast's jaw yawning open, the endless gleam of wealth resting in silence. It should have inspired awe, but instead, it felt suffocating. I reached out instinctively, brushing my fingertips across a bar of gold. Its surface was smooth, polished to perfection, but the moment I touched it, I felt nothing. No spark of joy, no rush of power, only weight, cold and immovable. Eleanor noticed and tilted her head. Strange, isn't it? How something the world kills for feels so lifeless in your hands. I met her gaze, unsure how to respond. She walked further, her heels tapping sharply, every sound amplified in the cavernous silence. These bars aren't just gold. They're contracts signed in blood. Their families starved so others could profit. Their promises broken in, boardrooms where no one remembers the names of those who suffered. Her words painted pictures darker than the gleam around us. Suddenly, the room didn't feel like a treasure trove. It felt like a tomb. As we walked, she pointed to certain sections. This vault has seen it all. Refugees pawning heirlooms they never recovered. Farmers ruined by debts that bought someone else's luxury car. Mothers trading wedding rings for the promise of bread. And what did this empire do? It counted, stored, locked it all away. Safe, silent, untouched. Her voice trembled, and for the first time I realized that this wasn't just a tour. It was a confession. I wanted to ask why she brought me, of all people, but she seemed to anticipate the thought. She stopped abruptly in front of a tall iron shelf stacked with silver coins. Turning to me, she asked quietly, "What do you see?" I hesitated, then admitted, "Treasure." Her eyes narrowed, sharp as knives. "Look again." I forced myself to see differently, to imagine the hands that once held those coins, the desperate grip of someone begging for a chance, the hollow eyes of someone who had to let go. And suddenly, treasure felt like burden. Her expression softened slightly, as though I had passed some invisible test. "That's why I asked you here. Most would see only wealth. But if you can see the stories behind the shine, then maybe you understand why I hide from this place." We moved deeper into the vault, past glass cases holding jewels that sparkled like captured stars. Each one had a placard, dates, names, origins. But Eleanor touched none of them. Instead, she gestured to a dusty corner where a small wooden box sat, plain and unassuming. She knelt, lifted it, and opened the lid. Inside lay a handful of coins, tarnished, worn, each one etched with scratches from countless hands. "These," she said softly, "are worth more than everything else here, because they remind me of what was lost. These were taken from the poorest, the desperate, the forgotten. They were melted, minted, circulated again, their stories erased. But I kept these few, to remind myself that behind every vault door is human cost." Her voice cracked. She closed the box, holding it against her chest like a child clinging to a toy. I watched her, torn between admiration and sorrow. She had everything the world dreamed of, yet here she stood, broken not by poverty, but by wealth's cruel shadow. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes blazing with intensity. "You helped me when I had nothing. You saw me when others stepped aside. So now I ask, do you see this as treasure or as burden?" The weight of her question pressed down harder than the gold. My throat tightened. "I see both," I admitted, "because treasure is what the world calls it, but burden is what it truly is." Her lips curved into a faint, tragic smile. "Good. Then you understand." But before relief could settle in, her tone hardened. She took a step closer, her voice sharp, every syllable a blade. Her eyes pierced into mine, colder than the gold around us. "If you betray me," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "you'll regret ever touching those coins." The vault's silence grew heavier, as though the walls themselves had heard her warning. And in that suffocating moment, I realized this wasn't just an invitation. It was a test of loyalty that could cost me everything. She placed the golden coin on the polished table, and its weight bent the silence like iron pressed against glass. "This isn't currency," she whispered, her fingers lingering over its engraved crest. "It's a key." "A key to what?" My pulse hammered as she lifted her eyes to mine, her lips curling into a smile that hid centuries of legacy. And for the first time, I began to fear the coin burning in my pocket. The room seemed to shrink around us. The fire in the corner flickered nervously, its glow dancing across the coin's surface as though even the flames understood its power. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of her words. "A key?" I repeated, my voice unsteady. "To what?" Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. She turned the coin between her fingers, letting its golden face catch the light. "To decisions," she said at last. "To choices that shape nations while the world sleeps. This coin, one of only 12, opens doors not just to vaults, but to influence itself. With it, I can step into rooms where policies are born, where wars are wagered, where futures are quietly sold before the public even knows what's at stake." Her words sank into me like cold water. I stared at the small disk, suddenly monstrous in its simplicity. It wasn't wealth. It was power, concentrated into something you could slip into a pocket. I tried to laugh, though it came out dry. "You expect me to believe a coin controls all that?" Eleanor's smile didn't fade. Instead, she slid the coin across the table toward me. It stopped at the edge, right before my trembling hand. "Touch it," she urged softly. "Tell me you don't feel the weight." Against every instinct, I picked it up. Its surface was warm, almost unnaturally so, as if it carried the heat of countless hands before mine. The engraving pressed sharply into my skin, leaving a faint imprint when I turned it over. But more than that, I felt a heaviness that had nothing to do with metal. It was the heaviness of responsibility, of unseen history pressing down through the years. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my throat tightening. Her eyes softened, though they still burned with fire. "I want you to understand. The world doesn't run on money. It runs on those who decide where money flows. And these coins, they're the tickets into that circle. Every vault, every transaction, every hidden agenda, they're all marked by them. My family has carried this secret for generations, but betrayal tore it apart. I can't trust board members, advisors, not even blood. But you—" She hesitated, as if the next words were more dangerous than any locked vault. "You saw me when I was invisible. That's why I trust you now." The room tilted. I had come from nothing more than chance, kneeling on a dirty street to help a woman gather scattered coins, and now she was handing me a golden token that could topple governments. My hands shook as I set it back down, unable to bear the weight. "This is too much," I whispered. "I don't belong in this world." "Exactly," she replied sharply. "That's why you belong here more than anyone else. You haven't been poisoned by it. You don't see gold. You see people. That's what makes you dangerous to them." I wanted to protest, to run, to escape the suffocating truth she had placed before me. But another thought struck harder. If what she said was true, then even knowing about the coin already put me in danger. Secrets like this weren't spoken without consequence. "Why show me this?" I asked. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Because secrets rot when they stay buried, and I refuse to rot with them." Her hands brushed the coin once more before she pushed it firmly into my palm. "Keep it. Hide it. Protect it. If they know you have it, they will come for you. But if you use it wisely, you'll see the world for what it truly is." The coin burned against my skin. I wanted to drop it, to shove it away, but my fingers closed around it as though bound by fate. My mind spun with questions. Who were they? How many others held the remaining coins? What battles? What betrayals? What blood had been shed to keep them? And above all, why me, a stranger, a bystander, chosen for a secret that could drown me? Eleanor sat back, her posture calm, though her eyes betrayed the weight she carried. "You're scared," she said simply. "Good. Fear keeps you alive. But remember, this coin isn't just power. It's a mirror. It shows you who you are, depending on what you do with it." The words echoed in my mind, heavy as chains. I opened my mouth to respond, but before a sound could leave my lips, the air shifted. The vault door slammed shut behind us with a thunderous finality that shook the floor beneath my feet. The fire flickered violently, casting our shadows against the marble walls. Eleanor froze, her eyes darting toward the echoing footsteps now approaching from the darkness. And in that suffocating silence, I realized we were no longer alone. The boardroom isn't filled with men in suits, it's filled with predators in silk. They don't see me, not really. They see only the coin clutched in my trembling hand. And in that instant, I realize I'm not a guest at their table. I'm a piece on their chessboard. But Eleanor, she's the queen they've been plotting to trap. And tonight, the game is about to turn bloody. The air inside the boardroom was heavier than the vault itself. The walls were paneled in mahogany, so polished it gleamed like still water, but the atmosphere was anything but calm. The long table stretched between us, its glossy surface reflecting a dozen faces that carried the weight of power and the stench of ambition. These weren't just executives. They were wolves dressed in silk ties and gold watches, eyes sharpened by years of devouring competitors. Each movement was calculated, each word measured to cut. And at the far end of the table sat Eleanor, her posture regal, her gaze unwavering, her silence louder than their murmurs. I sat at her right, uninvited but deliberately placed by her side. I could feel their eyes on me, confused, suspicious, irritated. I didn't belong in this room, and they knew it. My shirt was plain, my shoes scuffed, but worse than all that was the coin in my pocket, the one Eleanor had entrusted to me. They sensed it, like blood in the water. The meeting began with pleasantries sharp as glass. One by one the board members spoke, their words dressed as questions but laced with venom. "Miss Whitmore," one began, his silver hair slicked back, his tone dripping with condescension. You're Absence these last years has left gaps. Gaps we've had to fill. It would be prudent, perhaps, to step aside now, for the stability of the company. Another chimed in, his smile a predator's grin. Yes, Eleanor. Surely you can't think to lead again. Not after, well, after everything. The word everything hung in the air like a blade, unspoken scandals wrapped in polite cruelty. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She sat taller, her hands folded neatly on the table. Stability built on betrayal isn't stability at all, she said evenly. I know what you've done in my absence, and so will the world if you push me further. Her calmness rattled them, though they tried not to show it. I felt my heart pounding, the coin burning against my thigh. Then one of them, a man with eyes like cold steel, leaned forward. His gaze slid past Eleanor and fixed on me. "And who is this?" he demanded. "Why does he sit at our table?" The room stilled. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Eleanor's voice was sharp, protective. "He is here because he saw me when none of you did. When I was nothing, he treated me as human, something money could never buy." The words cut deeper than any blade. I saw the men's jaws tighten, their discomfort betraying them. Compassion was foreign to them, a loyalty not built on contracts, but on humanity. It unsettled them. One of them chuckled bitterly. "So, this stranger is your defense against us? A boy who stumbled in off the streets?" Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. "Sometimes, the truth comes from the streets more than the boardroom." The silence that followed was suffocating. Their eyes darted between me and the coin, though none spoke of it directly. Not yet. But the weight of its presence was undeniable. The discussion twisted into accusations, masked as proposals. They questioned her judgment, mocked her absence, hinted at replacing her altogether. And through it all, Eleanor parried each word with calm precision. Where they thrust, she countered. Where they mocked, she reminded them of their failings. Watching her was like watching a general in battle. Every phrase a sword, every glance a shield. But the more she fought, the more I felt their attention shift toward me. They whispered to each other, their eyes flicking like daggers in my direction. I knew what they wanted. Not me. Not Eleanor's explanations. They wanted the coin. And then it happened. One of the older members, his gold ring glinting as he tapped the table, finally broke the facade. He leaned forward, his voice low but razor-sharp. "Let's stop playing games. We all know why we're here. The boy has it." The room froze. My chest tightened. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Eleanor's chair scraped softly as she rose. "Enough," she commanded, her voice echoing against the mahogany walls. "He is under my protection. The coin stays where it is." But her words didn't cool the fire. They fanned it. The man sneered, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a snarl. "Protection? Eleanor, you of all people know there is no protection in this room. You've brought an outsider into our circle, and for that, you risk everything. Unless, of course." His gaze burned into mine. He hands it over willingly. The silence was absolute, thick as smoke. My fingers itched against my pocket, where the coin lay heavy, accusing. For the first time, I felt the full gravity of Eleanor's world, not as luxury, not as power, but as war. These men weren't board members. They were executioners waiting for the excuse to strike, and I was holding the weapon they all wanted. The man's eyes glittered with hunger as he leaned closer across the polished table. "Give us the coin," he hissed, every syllable sharp, "or lose everything." The others nodded, their shadows stretching long across the walls like claws. And in that suffocating silence, I realized, whether I kept it or surrendered it, my life would never be mine again. Trust is the rarest currency, and the most expensive. Her eyes lock on mine, trembling, as if my next choice could shatter her entire world. If I hand over the coin, She loses her empire to the wolves surrounding us. If I don't, I may never walk out of this room alive. The silence after the demand stretched like a noose, tightening around my neck. Every eye in the boardroom pinned me to my seat, and for the first time, I understood how prey must feel when the wolves close in. The coin felt unbearably heavy in my pocket, its outline pressing against the fabric like a brand. I could almost hear it whispering, "Choose." My chest rose and fell, in shallow breaths, but Eleanor's voice broke through the storm in my head. "Don't," she said softly. Her hand brushed mine under the table, a fleeting touch, but her grip was firm, grounding me. "If you give it to them, everything ends here." Her tone carried more weight than the threat of the board. She wasn't pleading for herself alone. She was defending something larger. Legacy, truth, perhaps even justice. One of the men scoffed, his diamond cufflinks catching the chandelier's light. "You place your empire in the hands of a stranger? A boy who knows nothing of the game we play?" Eleanor's eyes didn't leave mine. "Sometimes," she said, her voice steady as stone, "a stranger is the only one who can be trusted, because he hasn't been corrupted yet." The word struck me harder than I expected. In her gaze, I saw desperation cloaked in dignity. She wasn't just trusting me. She was betting everything on me. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer just a bystander pulled into her storm. I was the storm's deciding edge. But my fear clawed back. What if I chose wrong? What if by holding the coin, I doomed us both? I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "Why me?" I whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. Her answer came like a confession. "Because that coin isn't money. It's authority. Whoever holds it has the deciding vote, my vote, in this room. I can't give it to any of them. They'd use it to strip me of everything. Only someone outside the system, only you, can keep it safe." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't asked for this. I wasn't a player in billion-dollar games. I was just someone who stopped to help a woman gather her spilled coins on the street. And yet, here I was, clutching the symbol of her power, standing between her empire and its executioners. The board erupted in murmurs. Some voices were sharp with anger, others with mocking laughter. "This is absurd," one barked, slamming his fist on the polished table. "You're gambling the bank's stability on a stranger's conscience." Another leaned forward, his face darkening. "Hand it over, boy. You have no idea what you're holding." But I did. I had more than an idea. I had a choice. My palms were slick with sweat as I slowly withdrew the coin from my pocket. Its golden surface gleamed under the chandelier, and the room collectively leaned forward, hungry for it. The crest engraved on its face, a crowned lion surrounded by ivy, seemed to roar silently against their greed. The weight of their stares pressed down on me. I could feel Eleanor trembling beside me, though her face remained unreadable, carved from marble. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. If I handed the coin to them, Eleanor would lose everything. She would be outvoted, overpowered, silenced. Her disguise as a beggar, her test of humanity, her quiet resistance, it would all have been for nothing. If I refused, they might destroy me on the spot. People like them didn't need to shout to end a life. They had quieter, deadlier ways. Time slowed. I looked at Eleanor. She didn't speak. She didn't plead. She only held my gaze with a look that said, "Trust is a choice, and it's yours now." The room blurred around me. My thoughts screamed in chaos. "Survive, survive, survive!" But another voice rose beneath it, steadier, stronger. "Do not betray her. Not after everything." I closed my eyes, inhaled once, and made my choice. When I opened them again, my fist was clenched tight around the coin. The board erupted. Shouts, accusations, chairs scraping against marble. Eleanor's hand pressed against mine in silent gratitude, but the fury around us grew louder, more dangerous. And as their rage filled the room like a storm breaking, I knew. Keeping the coin meant keeping her trust. But it also meant declaring war. Betrayal always comes from the closest seat at the table. I had braced myself for enemies in silk suits, but never imagined the knife would come from her own side. One of her supposed allies rose slowly, his hand sliding across the polished oak until it pressed against the alarm. The shrill wail of the vault sirens tore through the air, drowning out Eleanor's scream. Run. And in that instant, I realized the hunt had begun. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not just a warning, but a verdict. A metallic howl that filled the cavernous boardroom, rattling chandeliers and echoing down marble corridors. My heart seized as red lights began to pulse along the ceiling, painting every face in a crimson wash. Eleanor's hand clamped around my wrist with surprising strength. Gone was the composed queen who had sparred with predators moments ago. This was survival distilled to instinct. She yanked me toward the side door, heels striking the floor in furious rhythm. Behind us, the boardroom erupted. Some shouted for security, others for control of the coin. But all I heard was the accelerating pound of my own heartbeat, syncing with the wailing sirens. We stumbled into a corridor lined with portraits of grim-faced founders. Their painted eyes seemed to watch us with a kind of judgment, as though they had seen countless betrayals before, and expected this one too. Eleanor's breath was ragged, but her voice, when it came, was laced with steel. "Never trust anyone at the table," she hissed, pulling me onward. "Every coin I've ever given has been stolen. Every hand I've ever shaken has pulled away." Her words cut through me, not just because of the sorrow in them, but because of the way she clung to me, as if I was the last coin she hadn't lost yet. My chest tightened. I wasn't sure I deserved that trust, but in this moment, I had no choice but to carry it. Guards surged from the far end of the hallway, their boots pounding like war drums. Eleanor veered left, dragging me down a narrow flight of stairs that spiraled into the shadows beneath the bank. The air grew colder, damper, and the sirens above muffled into a dull, angry roar. "What happens if they catch us?" I panted, nearly tripping on the steps. "They won't," she said, but her trembling grip betrayed the fear behind her words. We burst into a subterranean hall lined with vaults. Their steel doors loomed like silent titans, each one bolted shut, each one guarding secrets that smelled of old money and older sins. The floor gleamed beneath our feet, polished to a mirror sheen. In that reflection, I saw us. Two fugitives, one in rags, and one clutching a coin that could topple empires. "They betrayed you," I whispered, still struggling to comprehend the speed of the turn. "Your own board, your own people." Her laugh was short, bitter. "Do you think betrayal is rare in places like this? Betrayal is the only language power speaks. That's why I tested you. That's why I disguised myself. Because when everything else falls apart, only the truth remains." Her words hit harder than the alarms. This wasn't just her story. It was the truth of wealth itself, of how power corrodes and corrodes until even loyalty is a currency too expensive to buy. Footsteps thundered above us, then down another stairwell nearby. We were running out of time. Eleanor pulled me toward a service door at the end of the hall. My lungs burned, but I forced my legs forward, clutching the coin so tightly the crest dug into my skin. We burst through the door and found ourselves in a service corridor, fluorescent lights flickering, pipes hissing overhead. The scent of dust and oil clung to the air. Eleanor pressed her back against the wall, chest heaving. Her eyes darted, calculating every shadow. "This isn't the first time," she admitted, voice low, almost broken. "I've been chased before, betrayed before, but every time I lost something, an ally, a secret, a part of myself. Tonight I refuse to lose what matters most." Her eyes locked on mine, fierce and unyielding. My throat tightened. She wasn't talking about the bank, the vault, or even the empire. She was talking about trust. About me. The slam of a metal door echoed behind us. Voices shouted. Guards closing in. Their radios crackling orders. Eleanor seized my hand again and pushed forward. We ran through twisting passages that seemed endless, each one humming with the mechanical heart of the bank. My legs screamed with exhaustion, but adrenaline carried me. Every corner could have been our end. Every shadow a trap. Finally, a faint glimmer appeared ahead. The pale glow of moonlight spilling through an emergency exit. My chest tightened with hope. Eleanor shoved the door open, and we stumbled into the night air. But hope died as quickly as it flared. Across the street, a line of vehicles waited. Black SUVs, their headlights blazing like the eyes of predators. Red and blue lights flashed, washing the pavement in chaos. Sirens shrieked louder now, not just inside the bank, but outside too. Dozens of men stepped forward in unison, their formation a wall of power and threat. Guns glinted beneath their coats. Radios crackled. And at the center of it all, the board member who had triggered the alarm stepped calmly into the light, his smirk a blade across his face. The trap hadn't just been sprung, it had been waiting all along. We burst into the night, gasping for freedom, only to be blinded by flashing lights already waiting outside. Engines roared, boots pounded, and the circle of power closed around us with surgical precision. Eleanor's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt, her whisper sharp against the storm. Whatever happens, don't let go of the coin. And as the shadows converged, I realized we hadn't escaped the betrayal. We had only run straight into its jaws. I never knew a coin could feel like a stone. In my palm lies her empire, her legacy, her very life. But in the shadows beyond, men wait to tear it from me. And the question burns hotter than fire. Am I strong enough to carry it? The coin was no bigger than any other. Smooth edges, etched crest, a circle of metal that caught the light like a shard of the sun. And yet, as it sat in my palm, it felt heavier than the world itself. Every second I held it, my fingers stiffened under its weight. My chest tightened as though invisible chains had been clasped around my shoulders. I remembered the beginning, the dusty street, the clatter of scattered coins, the woman dismissed by every passerby as worthless. I had bent down, foolishly thinking I was helping her. But now, as the sirens blared in the distance and the night pressed in close, I realized that moment had been a doorway. The spilled coins had not been an accident. They were an initiation. Beside me, Eleanor's breathing was ragged, but her eyes blazed like a furnace. She walked with the authority of someone who knew that empires could crumble in silence, and that silence could kill louder than 1,000 guns. Yet tonight, I could see the toll etched into her features, the tremor in her hand, the blood that had dried at the edge of her sleeve, the weight of too many years of betrayal pressing down on her spirit. Her gaze fell to the coin in my palm. "That," she said hoarsely, "is not gold. It is fire, and fire will either warm you or consume you." The words made my throat dry. I closed my fist around the coin, feeling its edges bite into my skin. Behind us, faint echoes of boots reverberated, men hunting us like wolves trailing wounded prey. Each step forward felt like a test. My fear grew heavier, yet strangely so did my conviction. Eleanor glanced at me. "You still don't understand why I chose you." I met her eyes, searching for an answer I didn't have. I was just there, just a stranger who picked up coins from the ground. She shook her head, fierce. "No, you saw me when others looked away. You lifted dignity from the dust. That is the only qualification that matters. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Do you know how many men wear crowns but cannot see a soul?" Her words cut deep, stirring both pride and terror. Because if what she said was true, then the coin wasn't just a burden. It was a mirror, reflecting not only her trust but my own worth. and that was scarier than any threat waiting in the shadows. We slipped into a narrow alley behind the bank. The smell of oil and rust filled the air. Broken glass crunched under my shoes, each sound like a signal flare to those who pursued us. Eleanor pressed her back to the wall, motioning for silence. The glow of headlights crawled across the alley's mouth, and voices barked orders into radios. I clenched the coin tighter, imagining it radiating heat. What if they caught us? What if they pried it from my hand? Would her empire fall like sand through an open fist? Would I be remembered only as the fool who couldn't hold on? Eleanor's whisper broke the tension. The coin isn't just power. It's memory. It holds decisions, signatures, entire histories locked into it. Men would kill for it, not because of what it buys, but because of what it represents. I swallowed, the truth lodging like stone in my chest. I hadn't chosen this path, but the path had chosen me. A sudden shout echoed down the alley. "There! They're here!" Panic surged. Eleanor seized my arm, dragging me forward through shadows that twisted like mazes. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But the coin in my fist seemed to pulse, each throb keeping me upright. We stumbled through a rusted gate into the back streets of the city. The world looked different now. Each neon light, each cracked pavement, each homeless figure at the corner seemed to whisper of the same truth. Wealth blinded more than it revealed. Eleanor had seen this long ago. I was only beginning to learn. At last, we ducked into the hollow of an abandoned warehouse. Dust motes danced in the pale moonlight streaming through shattered windows. My chest heaved, and I leaned against a wall, trying to steady myself. The coin gleamed faintly in my palm, catching the silver of the moon. Eleanor stepped close, her face inches from mine. Her eyes were wild, fierce, and unyielding. "Listen to me," she said, her voice trembling with both urgency and passion. "This is your moment of truth. If you keep the coin, you will never live an ordinary life again. The world will hunt you, test you, demand things you never thought you could give. But if you let it go, if you surrender it now, you will live safely in shadows, while everything we could have built dies." Her words struck like a hammer. Ordinary life. The thought of it suddenly seemed both tempting and hollow. I thought of the street where it began, of the spilled coins glinting in the sun, of the dignity in her silence when everyone else ignored her. I thought of how my own heart had stirred that day, not knowing why, but unable to look away. And now, here we were, my hand closed over a single coin that could rewrite destiny. She gripped my hand with a ferocity that made my knuckles ache, her eyes blazing with fire and fear all at once. "If you keep it," she whispered, "you will never live an ordinary life again." Her words echoed in the hollow warehouse, each syllable a prophecy I couldn't escape. And as the shadows outside thickened with approaching footsteps, I knew. I had only moments left to decide what kind of life I would choose. Every destiny begins with a single choice. Mine lies in whether to guard a coin or give up a queen. Her gaze pierces me, begging for more than loyalty, demanding something far deeper. And in that fragile silence, I know, my decision will not just shape her empire, but rewrite both our lives. The city was alive with noise, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Sirens wailed in the distance, reporters shouted outside the barricades, board members argued in furious whispers. But for me, the world had shrunk to a single coin resting in my palm, and the woman standing before me. The weight of it hadn't lessened since the first moment I held it. If anything, it grew heavier, as though every breath, every accusation, every desperate cry in the night was being etched into the metal. Eleanor's eyes, tired, haunted, but unbroken, searched mine as if the universe itself hung on what I would decide. I remembered the street where it began, the coins scattered like fallen stars, her trembling hands reaching for them, the way the world walked past her without care. That single act of bending down had pulled me into her orbit, binding me to a destiny I had never imagined. Now, here in the glare of the city's eyes, I realized I had no more time to hide behind hesitation. The boardroom flashed in my mind. Those predators in silk who demanded the coin, who saw me as nothing more than a pawn. The vault echoed in my memory, its steel walls, the secrets entombed in silence. And beyond it all, the street still lived inside me. The place where I had first seen, not a beggar, not a millionaire, but a human being asking to be seen. I lifted the coin slowly, its golden crest catching the floodlights that streamed through the broken windows of the courthouse steps where we now stood. Reporters surged closer, cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. The board had cornered us, desperate to spin the narrative before the truth took root. Eleanor did not flinch. She stood beside me with her chin lifted, her dignity unshaken even as they hurled accusations of madness, betrayal, and incompetence. She was no longer the woman in rags, nor the queen trapped in her own boardroom. She was a fighter, a survivor, a symbol. The leader of the board, his voice sharp as a blade, thundered, "That coin belongs to the institution. Hand it over, or watch the empire crumble." Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to protect myself, to run. But then Eleanor's hand brushed mine, a soft touch that steadied the storm raging inside me. Her whisper was almost drowned by the chaos, yet it reached me clear as a bell. "Don't give them power. Not again. Stand with me." I drew a breath, and in that moment, the fear lifted. The decision was no longer about survival. It was about truth. I raised my voice, letting it carry over the roar of the crowd. "This coin does not belong to you. It belongs to her, the one who built this empire when you sought only to devour it. You claim wealth, but she holds humanity. And if this coin decides destiny, then my choice is made." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The board erupted in outrage, shouting, demanding order. Reporters pressed closer, their cameras flashing in frantic bursts. But above it all, Eleanor's eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not sorrow, but hope. I placed the coin firmly in her hand. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. And then she turned to the cameras, her voice sharp, unwavering. "For too long corruption has hidden behind polished walls. But no longer. Tonight the truth is witnessed by every citizen. You wanted my silence, yet here is my voice. You wanted my obedience, yet here is my defiance. This coin is not yours. It never was." The city roared. A tidal wave of scandal crashed through the night as reporters shouted questions, headlines forming in real time. The board scrambled to regain control, but their masks were slipping, their fear naked for the world to see. And in that storm, Eleanor turned back to me. The coin glinted between us like a covenant, a promise forged in fire. She reached for my hand, clasping it tightly, her strength flowing into me. "Now," she said, her voice low but trembling with emotion, "will you stand beside me forever?" The question struck deeper than the chaos around us. This was no longer about a coin, or a bank, or even the corruption we had fought. This was about destiny, not hers alone, but ours. The path ahead would not be easy. It would demand sacrifice, courage, and the abandonment of any dream of ordinary life. But as her hand tightened around mine, I realized my choice had already been made. The crowd still roared, the board still fumed, the city still trembled with scandal. Yet all I saw was her eyes, burning with hope and fear entwined. Her question lingered in the charged air. "Will you stand beside me forever?" And as I drew breath to answer, the storm around us deepened, reminding me that destiny never waits for permission. I returned to the same street where coins once scattered in the dust. Only now, the beggar is gone, and beside me stands the woman I once mistook for one. In my hand rests the golden coin, heavy not with metal, but with every choice, every betrayal, every moment that led me here. And in that instant, I know my life will never belong to the ordinary again. The street looks different now, though the stones beneath my feet are the same. Once they echoed with indifference, passers-by ignoring the woman on her knees, gathering coins as if they were scraps of dignity. Today, they carry the hum of history remade, of stories that began in shadows and now blaze in the open. I glance at Eleanor, and for the first time, I don't see disguise or burden. I see her as she truly is. Not a beggar, not a queen, but a woman who chose truth over comfort, who placed her empire into the trembling hands of a stranger and dared him to carry it. The coin gleams in my palm, but I know it is no longer just hers. It is ours, a symbol of trust forged in fear, in betrayal, in survival. It began as metal, became a key, and now it is something greater still, a vow. I think back to every place this journey carried us. The boardroom where silk-clad predators circled like vultures, the vault where silence pressed down heavier than steel, the alleys where betrayal chased us like fire through dry grass, and through it all, her voice, steady even when her hands trembled. Trust is the rarest currency. She was right. Trust had cost us everything, and yet it was the only thing that bought us a future. We stop at the very corner where I had first bent down to help her. The memory burns bright. The weight of strangers' stares, the sound of coins scattering, the way her eyes had pierced me through rags and silence. I remember thinking she was no ordinary beggar, and I was right. Eleanor speaks softly, almost to herself. This is where it all began. I nod. And where it turned. She looks at me then, her eyes reflecting both fire and sorrow. Do you regret it? Picking up those coins? Choosing me? The question strikes deeper than any boardroom threat. Regret? How could I? The path had been violent, terrifying, relentless. I had lost the hope of anonymity, the safety of ordinariness. But in exchange, I had gained purpose, truth, and her. I shake my head. No, I don't regret it. Because kindness was the first coin I ever invested, and it paid in destiny. Her lips tremble with something between a smile and a sob. She slips her hand into mine, and for a heartbeat, the world falls silent around us. But silence never lasts. The city roars again. Headlines scream our names. Reporters spin stories of scandal and redemption. Investors rage and scramble. And in the middle of it all, Eleanor and I stand side by side, not as prey or predator, not as queen or pawn, but as partners bound by fire. We set out not to save a bank alone, but to change the lives chained to it, to strip corruption from the vaults, to remind the world that wealth without humanity is just another prison. And for the first time, I believe we can. The coin slips back into my pocket, not as a burden, but as a reminder. It is no longer the stone that weighed me down, but the compass that points me forward. Eleanor's hand tightens around mine. The storm isn't over, she whispers. I know, I reply, but neither are we. My phone buzzes in my pocket, its vibration sharp against the weight of the coin. Another message, another challenge, another test of who I've become. I take a deep breath, slip the golden coin securely back into place, and glance at Eleanor. Then I step forward, ready, not for peace, but for the next storm that waits just beyond the corner. One coin changed everything in this story. But your voice can change mine. Tell me in the comments what lesson you'll carry from this journey, because your words matter here. Share this video so someone else might find hope in it too. And if you're ready for more stories filled with suspense, heartbreak, and destiny, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. The next storm is coming, and I want you with me when it breaks.